A Many Tale is a serialized story by Jacob White following a mouseling called Opaline, a world-hopping, time-traveling hero. The story follows Opaline as he travels through a litany of fantasy and sci-fi worlds that need him. Filled with absolutely fantastic world building from Jacob White, A Many Tale is definitely a story that needs to be read and talked about more. And that is why we're doing this video series on A Many Tale. With each video, we're going to be covering 7 to 8 chapters. Now, these videos are meant to be light recaps, and I heavily encourage all of you to go and read the chapters. So without further ado, let's dive in to A Many Tale. Its litany of incredible worlds, characters, and of course, its titular character, the mouseling Opaline. I'm not going to cover the first chapter because I already covered it in this video right here, so go read it, watch the video, come back. But for those of you that just want a quick recap of the first chapter introduces us to Opaline, their condition, their curse of hopping through a litany of other worlds, and their dragon friend, god, named Peridot. Peridot is one of Opaline's few friends and is the one that actually bestowed the curse upon Opaline. However, it seems accidental, and Peridot truly does love Opaline, and Opaline does love Peridot. However, Opaline in this first chapter laments about never knowing when he's going to blink to another world, so Peridot gives him a special top. This top floats in the air, and when it stops spinning, Peridot knows that he is about to be blinked away to another world. Now, this top is extremely important for later episodes because it contains a part of Peridot's soul. But now let's move on to Chapter 2, Unfortunate Company. And this second chapter essentially outlines what the typical A Many Tale story is. Opaline is fighting a monster and is basically tasked with killing the monster so that they can blink to the next world. But we also have two major things that happen in this particular chapter. First, we're introduced to another world walker, Porbio. Porbio's existence introduces us to the fact that there are other world walkers that move through the many worlds of A Many Tale. And we also learned that Porbio is kinda crazy. While Opaline constantly sets out to save people, many times failing, Porbio is kind of aloof or indifferent to many of his jobs. Despite this and the obvious annoyance that Opaline has, both can technically, I think, be considered friends. Also in episode 2, we're introduced to the concept of Stonefire Sorcery. This is Opaline's main use of magic. Now, this Stonefire Sorcery, which is Opaline's ace in the hole, is essentially a breath weapon that this mouseling has, that it consists of blue and orange fire, and if it touches a living being, it turns them to stone. However, it's set up throughout A Many Tale that Opaline only has a certain amount of this sorcery innately within him. And this creates a lot of tension in A Many Tale because Opaline is constantly juggling whether to use his Stonefire Sorcery. Now, in Chapter 2, the beast that Opaline is fighting is resistant to Stonefire Sorcery, so it's not an automatic I win button. At least it's immune to this sorcery on the outside, because Opaline eventually fires a blast of Stonefire Sorcery, reminiscent of Godzilla 2014, down the throat of this monster, turning it to stone from the inside out, which is cool. But otherwise, Chapter 2 is a setup chapter for what is to come. And by setup, I mean giving you a taste of what this story is and what it has to offer. So at least read the first 3 chapters to see if it will be your taste. Next, we can move on to Chapter 3, which is one of my personal favorite chapters, Mice Look Up. The premise of the story is that Opaline needs to trek to a ruined city to fight a monster, the general setup of A Many Tale. Throughout this time, we get some discussion on dragons within the world of A Many Tale, and to put it simply, dragons are the true gods of this universe. Dragons are world makers. They can create and destroy entire universes. Peridot is one of these godlike dragons. In fact, let me read a quick excerpt from the actual chapter because it describes the dragons well. Capital D dragons had a different tone to their name. They were the gods who built worlds. From what I had seen and what Peridot has told me, only dragons were real gods. All else were their children, their blessed scions, or imposters. Now, this is extremely important because the monster within this ruined city was actually a fallen angel created by one of these dragons. They were at one point a god. And then Jacob White begins to unveil one of his greatest strengths, which is nuanced storytelling. You see, Abaddon was a god for the people of this world, and for many centuries she provided them assistance, knowledge, and anything else that she could physically provide. But this fallen angel did not have power over the weather. She had the domain of the harvest, so she was giving food. But as the drought came, the citizens of the world turned against this angel. And so the people of the world named this angel a betrayer, and they fell from the sky in a new monstrous form because they took the form of what the mortals thought of them. Eventually they were subdued, though, by a previous hero who turned them to stone. And after so much time, heartache, and suffering, Opaline realizes that they can't rehabilitate this fallen angel and are forced to put them down. Opaline heads out of the ruins and returns to a settlement with the mortals who are living in this realm and sees a statue of that old hero. And by this point, I think many of you are able to guess what that hero is, or who that hero is, really. An ancient, esoteric statue of Opaline stands there, and he is in awe of it, but also horrified. Because Opaline hadn't done this yet, which means a future version of himself is going to drop from the sky, come to this world, and trap this fallen angel, this tragic character in stone, for thousands of years. And this is one of the reasons why I love this particular chapter so much, because Opaline repeats throughout the chapter that mice look up. You have to look up to the sky when you're smaller, because that's where the danger comes. But the statue of this future Opaline, it's looking down. It signals that there's going to be a change in Opaline at some point, where hopping through so many worlds, seeing so much destruction, so much hate, so much misery, that can change a person and make them cold. Because the one thing that makes Opaline really special is their heart. Because despite all the hardship that they face, they are still running into danger world after world, helping people. But this future Opaline, they're not the same. You see, our present Opaline that we know so well is always willing to talk. This future one, they're willing to fight. And Opaline also has to ask themselves the question, what are they? For the longest time, they've said that they're a mouse. But again, faced with this new reality and this new future, they cannot be sure. And it's an interesting philosophical question. After so many adventures and so many worlds, with nothing tying Opaline down, how can you possibly keep hold of yourself? And I think the final lines of this chapter encapsulate this. Beneath the statue, under the weight of an eternity of story, I felt my answer slipping away. There, a 20-meter Opaline looked down at his younger self. I looked down. Mice look up. Just fantastic. The first time I read this chapter, I got chills in those last lines. A Many Tale is a fun, multi-adventure serialized story, but it also is something more. Jacob White ties in these deeper themes throughout the story. And while each story can be read at its surface level, there is always something more happening below the surface, which is why I keep coming back to A Many Tale. And I'm happy to report that continuing to go throughout this series, this level of writing and these deeper ideas do not stop. And we can't stop either, because we still have many chapters to get through. And these next few chapters are our first mini arc. While chapters 4 to 7 don't have an official name, I'd like to propose the name The Meeting of the Gods arc. Maybe the Island of Lights arc? I don't know, but this is definitely one of the most important series of chapters in A Many Tale thus far. Because here, we're setting up the overarching narrative in the story. Yeah, they're not just individual chapters here. There's an overarching story, and we're getting into it.
Hey everyone, before continuing with the video, I just want to give a shout out to the channel's affiliate and sponsor, Only Crits. Only Crits is an online store that specializes in dice sales and 5e adventure modules. They also carry in stock dice trays and other assorted D&D accessories. I personally love their spell scroll dice trays and their duck dice. I mean, look guys, they're ducks in dice. If that's not gonna sell you, I don't know what is. They also have other little small friends, like chickens or pandas. If you're looking for a fun one-shot, I'd recommend The Emperor's End, or if you're looking for a full adventure, I'd recommend The Mountain Mountain Killer. It's a short adventure only running from levels 4 to 6, but it packs a lot of epic adventure and mystery in those short 3 levels. And it's set up so that you can drag and drop this plot into your homebrew adventures really easily. I've got an affiliate link in the description below, and if you enter the code DUNGEON, you will get a discount on your order. If you want awesome dice, accessories, or adventure modules, check out my friends at Only Crits. And now, back to the video.
Episode 4 is kind of crazy as we find Opaline alone on a beach in front of this massive white island. We later come to find out that this island is made out of this pure concrete that covers the surface. Upon landing on the island, Opaline has a close call with this group of golden men that attack him. And specifically, it's because these golden men can use magic. In fact, they are incredibly magical. And this is one of the first times in the series that we see Opaline actually have to really exert themselves in order to overcome these foes. He actually has to pull out 3 sticks of dynamite to blow up these enemies. And all the while going through this island, he's trying to cry out to Peridot, but Peridot isn't answering, and this starts to set off alarm bells in Opaline's head. Peridot has never ignored him in this way before, so something has to be up. In addition, despite all the magical golden men, as he continues to explore the island, he sees these massive starships kilometers long made out of this weird space crystal. And that's when Opaline also encounters what is essentially a slave hierarchy. There are these weird sentient cows with hands instead of horns, and they used to be enslaved to these gray dwarvish people, the golden men, and these things called the Eldest One. However, the cows rebelled, gained sentience, and are now trying to lead the revolution. It's like this weird, fucked up version of Animal Farm. And so, sensing bullshit, Opaline goes to the meat factory, which is now the cows' home base. Now, I should say that these cows, their official name is the Onikai, but I'm just going to refer to them as the cows because that is what they are. And so, as Opaline arrives at the meat factory, he asks to speak to the leader of the cows. And who should emerge but our old friend, Porbio. And that's the end of episode 4. What a cliffhanger, and I immediately jumped into episode 5. And it begins to get confusing. You see, in episode 5, we begin to get backstory on the cows, the revolution, and what might be going on here on the island, and perhaps why it involves Peridot. Porb essentially says that he has been helping the cows gain sentience and lead their revolution because he felt bad for them. Porbio also describes a massive temple fit for millions at the center of this island, although millions do not inhabit it. It is inhabited by a few, which, again, warning signs everywhere. And during this entire chapter, Porbio is intentionally trying to obscure things, trying to get Opaline not to engage. Usually he's a happy-go-lucky jokester, a trickster, but now he is genuinely concerned and worried. In fact, I'd like to read just a small section of Porbio's dialogue here because I think it encapsulates what's going on very well. Opaline, don't. Please. Porb teleported in front of me again. He said, Opaline, don't go. His voice had never carried such weight. Fur stood up over my body from that. He never lowered his voice. In light of our once ruling an entire people together, and my not being very good at telling truths to people, or you, or anyone but the mirror, I will admit one now. You are in the dark on this, and though you may be ignorant, know that everything is under control. Trust me, just this once, trust me. Don't walk any further down this road. It won't lead you anywhere kind. But Opaline continues to push, wanting to know what happened to Peridot, and is still trying to head to the temple. And so Porb must say what is inside the temple. And once again, another quote. They are gods without godhood. Beings so mighty that they've transcended the destruction of universes. They watch other gods build worlds, in the way a person studies ants digging their nest. At this point I was like, holy fuck, Opaline's out of their depth. Like, I know that they're a world walker, but these are the gods of gods. At least that's what I was thinking at the time. Opaline and Porb decide that they have to go on a mission to save Peridot. And that's the end of chapter 5, which rolls into chapter 6. And chapter 6 was the first chapter which kinda pissed me off because Opaline and Porbio just walk right up to the temple, or where the spaceships are. No plan, nothing, just rolling right up. And there's a section later on in this chapter where Jacob White writes in, as Opaline is thinking to himself, that yeah, he was overconfident, just trying to brute force his way in. But again, I was still just so annoyed that they walked in to this obviously bad situation. And long story short, they get jumped by these golden men once again. These things are resistant to magic, so they're quickly draining the resources of Opaline and Porbio. And then at some point, as more and more keep coming, Opaline is jumped by more than 100 of these golden men, and he is absolutely destroyed along with Porbio, getting captured in just a matter of seconds, really. Now, I won't lie, the fight against the golden men felt like it dragged a little bit. It felt like it might have been fluff, and I understand its purpose to show their strength, their power, their proficiency with magic, why they're threatening, but it took up a lot of the chapter. But the ending of chapter 6, in my opinion, is what really justifies the chapter. Because we learn that this whole island is almost a massive forge where they're forging everything from golems to weapons to, again, anything that you can imagine. But Opaline and Porbio are taken down to this huge pyramid where they meet gods, greater gods. These gods are 9 massive suspended worms, all of these different colors. But these worms aren't moving. It's like they're suspended in time. They also find Peridot, who is asleep, also suspended in time, in prison. And then Porbio explains what these creatures are and their names. The most ancient of ancients, those who treat worlds as gardens, children of providence and wombs of all knowledge. Opaline, you stand before the Janissar. And we quickly learn that each Janissar has a herald, the God Speakers, who are vessels for these suspended gods. And as these God Speakers begin to speak, we learn that to them, the World Walkers carry a plague, a true curse upon the universe. And we learn the translated name of this place, the Meeting of the Gods. I won't actually try to pronounce this word because it's really complicated, but just look at it right here and do your best. And I think Jacob White does a great job here at really conveying just how powerful and ancient these beings are to the audience. Opaline is dwarfed by these creatures, and also the bindings that hold him make it so he can't draw upon his sorcery. He has no way of defending himself, and our hero is at the absolute mercy of these entities. And then we get the best quote of this entire chapter. They sapped my sorcery, and my power, and my confidence. Their size, might, unimaginable power overwhelmed me. But that is always the issue with enormous scale. The smallest of things go unnoticed, and the smallest of threats go unheeded. This is just another reason why I love Opaline as a protagonist, because no matter what is happening, he is always pushing forward. He's this beacon of hope in whatever world he's in. He has this never say die attitude that is transfixing to read. I think one of the highest bits of praise that I can give a Many-Tale is that I feel better after reading one of its chapters. Opaline's presence and energy is, well, I think the best way to describe it is probably uplifting. Now we're moving on to chapter 7, and it's very complicated. I have a lot of notes here. We're going to try to get through it together. So, we learn a lot here. Firstly, the God Speakers are vessels. They speak for these ancient gods, the Janissar, but they also house within them probably part of their consciousness. They're not just speakers. They are the Janissar made in now mortal form, perhaps? We also learn a little bit about the nature of this curse. Specifically, the Janissar note that Peridot invoked this liminality in the universe. Now, being liminal is a constant shifting and moving nature, and this liminality exists in the space between existence and non-existence. That is what the Janissar are focused on, whether you exist or whether you don't exist. And now it is Peridot who is powering this liminality between these world walkers. Peridot is powering this liminality. because whenever they blip, these world walkers, they exist between existence and non-existence, and that's a glitch within the universe. Now, a usual creature would be destroyed by this liminality, but Peridot is doing something different, keeping these world walkers safe, but not really. Let me read you this quote. "Protection is active," the Red God speaker said. "Alona Bator, or Peridot as you call her, lie to the whims of these forces, unaware of her own danger." So, remember that dragons are gods. Peridot is a dragon. She is a builder of worlds, but even she is playing with forces that she does not fully understand. The Genisar are essentially saying that she messed up. And what did she mess up? Well, she messed up Locke's garden. Well, what is Locke's garden? Well, the God Speakers give us an answer. So, another quote. "All you have ever seen, or will see, is the garden of Locke, the All-Dragon, they who were birthed by stars, and a million names. This is all they created, the Father, the Mother, the Creator, without comprehension or dimension. Locke is the great dragon who planted the seeds of universes. They have blossomed, the flower, and you, rat, have wriggled into the fabric of this grand tapestry." So everything in the universe, in all universes, in all of existence is Locke's garden. This is the creator of everything, the impetus, the first domino to fall. As a reader, I think we need to understand Locke's garden as existence itself, at least right now in the story. So, if a person in A Many Tale is talking about Locke's garden, they are talking about everything, every universe, everywhere, all the time. And the problem is, Peridot touched something within this universe that she should not have touched, this primordial egg. But we'll talk about the primordial egg and all of this later on when talking about Chapter 7. But she touched it and unleashed a power that she did not understand, creating the World Walkers and this plague, creating the glitch in the universe, an imperfection in Locke's garden. And according to the God Speakers, there's only one way to fix this. Peridot must die. But Peridot doesn't need to die just because there's an imperfection. She needs to die because this glitch will attract something, a greater evil, the enemy. But somehow it's even worse than that, as another God Speaker begins to describe just what is happening with this glitch. Now this God Speaker is described as a Cyclops. So, in the text it says, "The Cyclops said, 'You are stuck bumping into the wall of what could be. The thousands of years in which Dawn, Opaline's home, existed are not attracting you. You are flying into it. The space and time beyond this point does not yet exist, meaning it will never exist. You are slamming yourself into the infinite wall of the end.'" Man, that's a lot. And what does it mean? Well, boiling down to it, non-existence is swallowing existence. This is becoming the end of Locke's garden. This glitch is letting in a corrupting force, and eventually there will be nothing left. There's not a continuation of the garden. We're all stuck right now in the story. And so that's what the God Speakers are up against. And at this point, and throughout the chapter so far, they've been shitting on Peridot, but now they really start going in onto why Peridot is so terrible, so awful. The Cyclops calls Peridot vain and arrogant because the Genisar were once dragons in the old universes, but new dragons were created to have their own universes. So the Genisar took a step back. They adopted new forms, the forms of these giant worms, because essentially they're allowing the new dragons a chance to create their own universes and do their own thing. But Peridot, from an old universe, is continuing to hold on to her draconic form. They call it disrespectful to the now ruling dragons who have their own universes, because she is continuing to take on this divine form when it's not her time anymore. The Genisar and the God Speakers say this: "Ugh, the disrespect to the next generation is immense. We have taken the shape of worms, humble, unseen creatures. She is grandiose. This parading through time must end." But during this time, Opaline realizes that they're trying to convince him of something, and when pushed, the Genisar give their answer, which is that they need the top that Peridot gave to Opaline in chapter 1 of a mini tale, because remember, that top holds part of Peridot's soul. And then they reveal again why they need Opaline here, because only a god can kill a god, or only a god's power can kill a god. And with that power, they believe that Opaline can kill Peridot, ending the plague, ending the cycle, ending all the planeswalkers, and they make these magnificent promises. Porbio is obsessed with beasts and creatures, and so they say that they will send him to a garden full of every beast and creature. And then they also say that to Opaline, they will send him home, right after the very moment he blinked out, and he will return a sage, the wisest of all the people, and a hero. Basically everything that he could have ever wanted at one point. But Opaline doesn't want this anymore. In fact, Opaline claps back against the hypocrisy of the Genisar, talking about arrogance, what could be. Again, the Genisar don't know what the future is right now. They say that they've taken humble forms, but they're these massive worms kilometers long, wielding armies. There's nothing humble about them. They still are within their vain arrogance themselves. And then Opaline says the following. I said, you offer me home. Perhaps a short while ago, I would have accepted your offer. But I'm not broken anymore. You offer me power? The tug of grandeur is nothing against the drive of devotion. And then Opaline, taking out the top, pushes it into Peridot, as at this point he's tricked the Genisar into thinking that he might actually do it. And with this, reconnecting to that part of her soul, Peridot wakes up, breaking free of the control of the Genisar, and Porbio, Opaline, and Peridot blip out. After blinking out, we get Peridot's side of the story, and what happened and what caused the glitch. And she talks about how her father or creator raised them in this small valley, teaching them, I guess, about humanity, love. Right? I don't think that they were a bad parent. They basically grounded their children and then gave them universes to make and build. However, after Peridot was sent away, she set out to find the place where she grew up once again. And after millennia of investigating, when I came to the barn in the valley where she grew up, nobody was there. I swam through the lake and came to the tiny island, no larger than a bedroom. On it was an egg, a broken, glowing, enormous egg. The voices called to me, and I touched the glistening sap from which leaked from the break. And after touching this egg and unlocking some strange primordial power in Locke's garden, all of this began. And then there's something a little heartbreaking, because Peridot and everyone else acknowledge that eventually the Genisar will summon her back, and she will be put in under that unconsciousness once more. And at that point, there will be really nothing that can be done, because the Genisar were kind to Opaline at the start, trying to convince him peacefully, and Peridot warns that they will not try that again. So that is chapter 7. The big bads have been established, and the meta plot for this entire series is underway. And so now let's turn to the final chapter that we'll cover in this video, chapter 8. Which is a duel at sunset, or really a duel at sun out. Because you see, this chapter takes place on a world where Opaline is fighting this cult leader on a sky bridge, connecting these two cities, while a sun is exploding, and Opaline only has 8 minutes to somehow escape this world. And really, this chapter is back to the usual many tale. Opaline is fighting this big bad, trying to win in this tense situation. And eventually Opaline does win, because Opaline is a very skilled fighter, uses lots of magic, etc, etc. But at this point we begin to see a darker side of Opaline. This coldness that sneaks into the character, because as he's standing over this beaten cult leader, he asks them, hey, do you want me to kill you, or do you want the sun to kill you? Because, again, the sun is exploding, and at this point he has 2 or 3 minutes before it hits. And the cult leader essentially asks Opaline to kill her, and to give her a honorable death. And Opaline simply laughs and says, well, the sun will kill you, chops off her hand, leaves. And as I was reading this chapter, I was asking myself, is this the beginning of the future Opaline that we saw in chapter 3, Mice Look Up? This cold hero who has lost that noble spark, let's say. And maybe, but we have to keep on reading. Also, this is easily one of the saddest endings of a mini tale I have read thus far as of June 20th, 2020. Because you see, Opaline saves this cult member from the grasp of this evil cult leader, and as the sun is exploding, he can't get out in time, so he weaves this bunker of stone fire to essentially create a capsule for them to survive in. But it's not enough. As they're floating through the wreckage of this world, things start to go bad. This guy, Chester, starts to suffer from radiation poisoning as the radiation has finally seeped through the stone, and just as it's hitting his cells, Opaline breaks out, leaving Chester to surely die. A mini tale does not shy away from showing you that Opaline a lot of the time fails, that no matter what's going to happen, that the story can always end kind of poorly, at least in the way that Opaline does not completely save the day. And that's a mini tale, episodes 1 to 8. If you want some more content before we cover episodes 9 to 16, please check out this video right here, and thank you for entering the dungeon.